a guy who didn't think supplements worked. And then when you started seeing in lab tests, thousands of people with autoimmune diseases reverse their autoimmune disease. This is working, and I can see it in lab tests, and I gotta keep doing this.
But one thing that is a universal truth in all nutrition and medicine, and there is no dispute over, is that you need to be sufficient in your essential micronutrients, or you will get a health condition or a disease. If that is the universal truth of nutrition, then why shouldn't we look at our diets and make that the first rule?
The body is not a static machine. It's a biology, it's analog, and it adapts. If you're consuming food that has a limited availability of certain nutrients, it changes itself to increase absorption of that nutrient.
Welcome to episode 1 of Supplements Revealed. I'm Dr. Patrick Gentempo, and I've spent most of my career in the health and wellness field, and I've always been fascinated by the topic of supplements. Being someone who has studied this quite a bit and has worked with patients in these realms, even I am still sometimes confused by all the information that's out there. A lot of it is rhetoric, a lot of it is scientifically based, and everything in between. So at Revealed Films, we felt it was important to bring to life a docuseries that can examine this subject like it's never been examined before. You are in for a real treat. I know, based on my experience through this journey, that this information not only can upgrade your life, but in many cases can be life-saving. There is no one expert in the world that can tell you everything you need to know about supplements, which is why we are bringing you dozens of them. We want you to understand where the pitfalls are, what things there are to avoid, what risks and dangers actually exist in the world of supplementation. And on the flip side, we want you to know what hope and possibilities exist in these realms. So sit tight. You are about to get the opportunity to get a front row seat to the best and most contemporary information that exists in the world of supplementation. Welcome to Supplements Revealed. One of the most impressive people that I spoke to through this entire journey was Dr. Stephen Gundry. He has an extraordinarily impressive resume. He was a heart surgeon. As a matter of fact, he and his partners still hold the record, even though he hasn't practiced in many years, for the most amount of infant heart transplants. So you can imagine a level of training, credentials, etc., that a man like this has to be able to do that kind of work. But after observing patients get better through supplementation, he felt there was something here that he needed to go explore, and now he's really committed his entire life and the rest of his career to this. He has some amazing, innovative, and very unique perspectives on supplementation. I can't tell you how excited I am to bring this to you. The wisdom you're going to get from this interview can change your life. So tune in and enjoy my interview with Dr. Stephen Gundry. Dr. Gundry, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So for the people who aren't familiar with your work, tell us a little bit about your history and how you got here.
Well, I'm a world-famous heart surgeon, former chairman and professor of cardiothoracic surgery at Loma University, actually one of the blue zones, the only blue zone in the United States. Mm-hmm. And about 20 years ago, my life was changed when I met a gentleman who I call Big Ed in all my books. And Big Ed had inoperable coronary artery disease. That means all his blood vessels were clogged up. You couldn't put stents in them. You couldn't do bypasses. And Big Ed had gone around the country, like many people, looking for someone to take him on. And he'd spent about 6 months going to centers, and everybody turned him down. And he came to me and after about 6 months, and I looked at his angiogram and I agreed with everybody else that he was inoperable. And he says, well, let me tell you, in the last 6 months, I've gone on a diet and I've lost 45 pounds. And I went to a health food store and I bought a bunch of supplements. He literally had a big shopping bag. And he says, maybe I did something in here. Now, this was a big man when I met him, 265, that's Big Ed. And I said, well, good for you for losing weight, but it's not going to do anything in your heart. And I know what you did with all those supplements. You made expensive urine. You wasted your money. And I firmly believe that. And he said, well, come on. I've come all the way from Miami, Florida to, Loma Linda. Why don't we get a new angiogram? I said, okay. So we get another angiogram. And in 6 months' time, this guy has cleaned out 50% of the blockages in his heart. Gone. I've got the 2 angiograms to look at. And I go, this is impossible. You couldn't have done this. So I started asking him about his diet. And lucky for me, I, at Yale University as an undergraduate, got to design my own major. And my major was human evolutionary biology. And I had a thesis that you could take a great ape, manipulate its food supply, manipulate its environment, and prove you derive it a human being. Mm-hmm. And I actually defended my thesis and got an honors and gave it to my parents. And went off, became a famous heart surgeon. As Ed's telling this story, I go, son of a gun, that's my thesis. And I was a big fat guy at that time. I was 70 pounds overweight, running 30 miles a week, going to the gym 1 hour every day, eating what I thought was an incredibly healthy diet. And high blood pressure, high cholesterol, migraine headaches, arthritis so bad I had to wear braces on my knees to run. And so, long story short, I put myself on this program, and I lost 50 pounds my first year and 20 pounds subsequently. And I started looking at Big Ed supplements, and I'm very famous for protecting the heart during heart surgery and heart transplants. And I had this combination of ingredients that I'd put down the veins and arteries of the heart to protect it. And as I started looking through Big Ed supplements, I realized that several of the things that he was taking, I was putting intravenously into these hearts. And it never occurred to me to swallow the dumb things. Mm-hmm. So that got me very interested in supplements. And long story short, after about a year of doing this at Loma Linda, I realized that I should teach people how to avoid me and not operate on them in the first place. So I resigned my position, and for the last almost 20 years now, I have a practice in Palm Springs and in Santa Barbara where every 3 months we ask people to make some changes in the food, go to Amazon, go to Costco, go to Trader Joe's and buy some supplements, and every 3 months, let's take some blood out of you, a lot, and see what's happened. And so I've written 4 best-selling books on New York Times bestsellers on that. The most famous one is The Plant Paradox. The current one is The Longevity Paradox, How to Die Young at a Ripe Old Age. And so that's what I do. Thanks to Big Ed.
I want to especially talk about your new book, but before we do, I want people to understand this shift that you made. You were a world-renowned heart surgeon, and with all the benefits that came with that, and then you decide to take up this anthem. This was a fairly profound shift, and I'm sure it had to affect your personal life. Talk about what it was like to make this shift.
Well, I looked in the mirror one Friday morning and I said, I'm making a mistake here. Rather than operate on people and then teach them how to eat to avoid me, I need to teach them how to eat, and they'll probably avoid me. And Upton Sinclair had a very famous quote, the famous muckraker of the early 20th century. He said, it's difficult to get a man to understand something if his salary depends on him not understanding it. Mm-hmm. And so you take a heart surgeon whose salary depends on people not taking care of themselves and then teaching people how to take care of themselves, that's really dumb. And you don't make a whole lot of money teaching people how to eat. And we actually went through all of our savings and actually rented houses for a while because couldn't even get any credit. But my attorney kept saying, you're doing the right thing. And sometimes when you do the right thing, it'll come out. And sure enough, after about 17 years of doing this, finally people started listening and started selling books. And now I have my own supplement line, Gundry MD. But it was a lot of chopping wood and carrying water, as Buddha would say.
I want to highlight that and put an exclamation point on what you're about to share. This did not come without a price.
But when you saw something, and then when you started seeing in lab tests and in how people, felt, or throwing away their diabetic medications, or throwing away their high blood pressure medications, or stopping a planned hip or a knee replacement because they actually regrew cartilage, and seeing thousands of people with autoimmune diseases reverse their autoimmune disease, with something that they were told was impossible. So that's why you just every day you saw something go, geez, this is working, and I can see it in lab tests, and I can hear it in people's stories. I got to keep doing this.
I want to talk a little bit about diet because it's so fundamental, but people could always get one of your books to get into detail about that. But give us an overview on how you advise people to eat.
Yeah, the first rule of the plant paradox, which is my most famous book, is it's not what I tell you to eat that's important. It's what I tell you not to eat. And I think that's really the rule. It's certain foods that I take away from people that I think, and many others think, we were not designed to eat. And those are certain plants that have a very good defense mechanism against being eaten. These, among other things, are a protein that are called lectins. And lectins are designed to make the predator, us or any other animal, not do well, not feel well, get depressed or anxious, get brain fog, develop leaky gut. And so when I take these foods away from people, or ask them to take them away, a whole lot gets better. The second principle is we are what we eat. That I think everybody realizes that, but we are what the thing we're eating ate. And unfortunately, in the last 50 years, really a cow is no longer a cow, a chicken is no longer a chicken. As I say, if you feed a chicken corn, that chicken now is just an ear of corn with feathers. Mm-hmm. And sadly, in the United States, about 70% of all the carbon in us, and we're a carbon-based life form, is derived from the carbon in corn. And Europeans, only 5% of their carbon is derived from corn. And that's actually really scary because none of us actually ever ate corn until 500 years ago when Columbian trade started. So it's an incredibly new addition to our diet. And I think it's actually scary that 70% of you and me, hopefully not me anymore, hopefully not you, is corn.
What are some of the foods that contain lectins?
So most grains have lectins. Gluten is a lectin. Most people don't know when they go gluten-free that they're actually eating other very lectin-containing foods like brown rice, like corn, like quinoa. Mm-hmm. Beans have some of the highest lectin content of any food. You can pressure cook beans or lentils and make them safe. And then there's the nightshade family, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, potatoes, even goji berries are nightshades.
I'm really curious about what supplements you include in your protocols, and this was really stepping out on the ledge from expensive urine.
Yeah, the first supplement I get everyone on, I am shocked with how low most people's vitamin D levels are. About 80% of Southern Californians have a low vitamin D. And I personally think that most people ought to run a vitamin D level of 80 to 100, maybe 120 nanograms per milliliter. I run mine personally greater than 120, and I have for the last 13 years just to prove I'm not dead. And so far, so good. I personally have never seen vitamin D toxicity in my practice. And I've had some people that we've measured. Actually, it's changed my life about vitamin D. Years ago, I saw an older couple, late 70s, who we routinely draw vitamin D levels. And in those days, we actually had, even if it was above 120, we would actually have a number. And both of them were about 270 and I'm looking at them across the table. And first of all, going through my mind is, well, why aren't you dead? Number one. And some forms of vitamin D toxicity can present with numbness in fingers and toes. And I'm going, any numbness in your fingers? No, why? And I said, well, you must take a lot of vitamin D. They said, oh yeah, it's an anti-aging drug. And I'm going, anti-aging drug? What are you talking about? And so that actually started me looking at the literature in vitamin D and reading all of Dr. Hollick's work from Boston University, who really is the father of vitamin D research. And he's only seen one example of vitamin D toxicity in his life. And that was a physician who, by mistake, because of a compounding pharmacy error, was taking 1 million international units a day for 6 months. And that's a lot. Every patient with autoimmune disease, and about 70% of my practice now is autoimmune disease, a heart surgeon. That's another story. But they all have very low vitamin D levels. The University of California, San Diego has shown that almost all people with cancer have a very low vitamin D level. And that vitamin D is very suppressive of cancer growth. And it also is essential, actually, to make stem cells that repopulate the lining of our gut grow and divide. And without vitamin D, they just kind of sit there and don't move. So if you have a leaky gut, and I think actually 100% of people I see with a disease at its origin is a leaky gut. And if you'd asked me that 15 years ago, I would have laughed you out of the room. So vitamin D, I think, is very essential. The University of California, San Diego says the average American should take 9,600 international units a day, which most people's eyebrows go. I say at the bare minimum, take 5,000. If I have somebody with autoimmune disease, I start them on 10,000. Some of my autoimmune disease patients, early on, I have them on 40, 45,000 international units a day to get their levels up. And then we can back off. But I'm a person who looks at blood work every 3 months, so I can see when we might be overshooting. But as long as calcium levels are fine, we're okay. When I'm using very high dose vitamin D, I like to add vitamin K2. I like a mixture of MK4 and MK7. You don't really need much, maybe 100 micrograms of each. If you want more, it's fine. But I like that buffer when I'm using high dose vitamin D. The second thing I think everybody has to have is some form of long chain omega-3s in their diet, particularly DHA. In my new book, The Longevity Paradox, there's very good data that in humans, people who have the highest omega-3 index, which basically looks at how much long-chain omega-3s that you have in your blood for the 2 months prior to the test. People who had the highest omega-3 index have the biggest brains and the biggest areas of memory, the hippocampus. People who have the lowest levels of omega-3 index have the most shrunken brains and the smallest areas of memory. So when Mom used to say fish is brain food, she knew what she was talking about. Our brain is about 60% fat, and half of the fat in our brain is DHA. And even in kids, we know that mothers who supplement with DHA during pregnancy have actually smarter kids, and kids who are supplemented with DHA as children actually perform much better in school. So it's DHA is brain food, so that's essential. The other thing I think is probably essential for most people. About 50% of people carry one or more mutations of the MTHFR mutation. I for people to remember it, I call it the mother effer gene, because if you say it out loud, we'll bleep you from network television. And this gene, we don't make the proper form of methyl B12 and methylfolate because of these enzyme deficiencies. And I think most people really should be taking a methyl B12, and they should get a sublingual form, because quite a number of people, surprisingly, lack what's called intrinsic factor that allows you to properly absorb B12 from your intestines, and putting it sublingual bypasses that circuit. And then methylfolate is a capsule, it's cheap, and it's absorbed without worrying about intrinsic factors. So I think for most people, those are really the big things I start people out. Then we are, in my opinion, very, very deficient in polyphenols. Those are plant compounds that myself and numerous other researchers have shown actually improve the flexibility of blood vessels. I've published results with people taking, for instance, grapeseed extract, French maritime tree bark, resveratrol, and shown that when they take these compounds, their blood vessels dilate effectively. When they don't take these compounds, their blood vessels are actually very stiff. And there's a saying in longevity that we are only as young as our blood vessels are flexible. I've also published data that these compounds make the inside wall of our blood vessels, for lack of a better word, slippery, makes them resistant to oxidation and attack by cholesterol. And we can show that when we remove these compounds, that in fact they become sticky again. And when we reintroduce them, they become slippery again. So here's a guy who thought that, supplements made expensive urine. And I can actually measure, either in blood tests or physiologic tests, the effect of taking some rather simple supplements. In fact, I've actually gotten pretty good at looking at somebody's blood work and say, did you stop, X, or did you change brands? And they go, oh yeah, we ran out, 3 weeks ago, and I forgot, or oh yeah, there was a sale, and so I tried that. And I said, these lab results are chronologic order, and you can go, well, look, here you were on this, and here's this number, and here you are now, and they'll look and say, you knew that? And I said, yeah, and it's not expensive urine.
So you bring up an interesting point about the lack of effectiveness, because someone might be in Walmart and say, oh, look, how does one separate the good from the bad?
So, there are good products that you can find. For instance, just throw out names, Costco and Trader Joe's and even Walmart. But it's a lot of it is buyer beware. I'll give you a great example of fish oil or long chain omega-3s. And there's algae-based fish oil, which is excellent. Many companies, serving size is one thing that everybody should look at, particularly when you're ordering on Amazon. They'll tell you that, the dose is 1,000 milligrams, and you didn't look on the back, and to get that 1,000 milligrams, you had to take 2, and they're only taking 1. And so, for example, I'll have somebody that I want on 1,000 milligrams of something, and I expect to see a result on a blood test, and it's not there. And the first thing I'll say is, you're not taking this product. Oh yeah, I'm taking it every day. I said, no, you're not. And they said, oh yeah. And I said, well, how many are you taking? Because I know the product. And they said, well, 1. And I said, well, no, didn't you read the back? What do you mean? I said, well, serving size is 2 to get the dose. Oh, is it said on the front, 1,000 milligrams? I said, yeah, it said on the front 1,000 milligrams, but they, tricked you. And many, many times people, for instance, there's some supplements that they may should be taking 4 or 5 capsules to get the dose we want, and they're only taking 1. So buyer beware. Look at the back, look at serving size. And then, for instance, when you're looking at DHA, look at serving size and then go down to the bottom, and you should see EPA and DHA when you're buying omega-3s. Mm-hmm. And I think personally that most people should have 1,000 milligrams of DHA per day. And why do I think that? Because after looking at thousands of patients and looking at their omega-3 index, 1,000 milligrams of DHA per day will get us there in 95% of people. And yet, when you buy a fish oil, you look at, 1,400 milligrams of omega-3s on the front. And then you go to the back and you may not even see the word DHA. Or if you go to the back and DHA, serving size is 2 and DHA is 500 milligrams. So you'd have to take 4 of these to get actually what I want in you. And they go, 4? But the package said, 1. So when buying supplements, it really is buyer beware. You have to understand there is a lot of trickery in supplements, and you got to know, the right amounts.
You mentioned having your own supplement line. Are there some, in order to have them, you had to create them?
Yes. Interesting story. Because of my fame, a lot of supplement companies through the years asked me to put my name on a line of their supplements. And despite the fact that I wasn't making any money, I resisted that because I knew exactly, from all my research on patients, what would work, what the dose was, what I would want. So I always refused them. And so a few years ago, a young man by the name of Craig Clemens came up after hearing me lecture, and he said, gosh, have you ever thought about making a line of supplements? And I said, oh, geez, don't get me started. And my wife was with me, and she said, oh, geez, not another one. And I said, yes, but, people want me to put my name on supplements, but, I know what should go in them, and I want to control that. And he goes, well, we could do that. And I go, what? And so my wife said, well, how are you going to sell them? And he said, well, we do 45-minute infomercials on the internet. And my wife goes, right, who's going to watch a 45-minute infomercial on the internet? And Craig said, well, you actually might be surprised. And of course, now we've had, over 30 million views of Gundry MD and me talking for 45 minutes on the internet. And so now, we're, as far as I know, we're the only supplement company where every one of my products I've designed which ingredients are going to go in there, the proper ratio of those ingredients based on my clinical practice of asking people, to, go get 20 of these things from Amazon or whatever, and, I'm not going to sell them to you because I'm a researcher and I didn't want to be involved in a profit margin to make people take supplements. I wanted to see what happens when they took the dumb things. And I think that's actually one of the reasons I have, why I sell supplements is because I can control them, and I made them based on what I saw in actual people. I think there's some very interesting areas of things we should be investigating. Number one, the compounds in mushrooms, which are called polyamines, are very longevity promoting. They're actually fascinating. So we've recently launched a liquid mushroom product called M Vitality that you can even mix in coffees. So mushrooms, in my research on longevity, in fact, there's a recent paper out of Singapore looking at humans And humans who eat 2 cups of mushrooms per week, and that's not much, cooked or raw, have about a 90% reduction in Alzheimer's compared to people who don't eat 2 cups of mushrooms. So, if we had a drug that was 90% effective against Alzheimer's, how much would you pay for that drug? And all you got to do is, buy a carton of, criminy mushrooms in the grocery store and either slice them on your salads or cook them or buy a supplement of mushrooms. And mushrooms are fascinating. So that's one really new addition. The other addition is there's more and more evidence that certain bacteria in our gut promote longevity and promote protection of our gut wall. And one of them has got a hilarious name, Eckerman mucinophilia. Say that 3 times. And this bug loves a type of fermented green tea, which is called pu'er tea. And you can get it. People have to make sure it's organic because most of it comes from China and a lot of it's contaminated with arsenic and heavy metals. So people, again, have to be aware. But this particular tea fosters the growth of Akkermansia mucinophilia. So I drink actually about 3 to 4 cups of that tea every day, and I have for years. And that's available. You can go wherever supplements are sold or tea is sold and find this. So those are a couple of new exciting steps in longevity.
That's great. I love it when you say this is what I'm doing. That's the final test because it's good for the physician and the patient.
Well, it's funny. In this book, the people have asked me for years and years and years, what supplements do you take? And I've always, said, no, I'm not going to tell you because you'll really think I'm a nutcase. But I actually list all the supplements that I take every day, and it is rather hilarious. I take actually about 120 pills, capsules, tablets in the morning and about 80 at night. And again, this is a guy who didn't think supplements worked. Now, why do I do that? Well, the reason I do that is if you look at hunter-gatherers, even modern hunter-gatherers, they consume on average about 250 different plant species on a rotating basis throughout the year. And all of these plants are growing in 6 feet of loam soil. They're the ultimate of biodynamic and organic. And all the animals that they're eating were also consuming these plants. So you're getting this incredible combination of polyphenols, flavonoids, anthocyanins, constantly in varying amounts throughout the day. And even if we ate an organic diet, even if we visited our farmer's market, the average American maybe at best gets 20 different plants in their diet on a routine basis. And unfortunately, most of our animals, have been fed corn and soybeans and grains and aren't eating grass and acorns and bugs. So if you really think that the best diet, the farmer's market diet, is going to duplicate what our ancestors had 100,000 years ago, I've got oceanfront property in Palm Springs to sell you. And I don't think it can be done. Now, we have a saying in our office that 150 is the new 100. And I firmly believe that. So we'll find out when I'm 150 if all this worked. But in the meantime, I'm investing in what I know, what I've learned from my patients, and they've taught me a great deal, that I want to try to duplicate what we used to be exposed to. And this is the field of epigenetics. Our genes have very little to do with our fate. In fact, in the book, we point out a huge article in Nature last year showed that humans' fate is only determined about 6% by our genes. 94% of our fate is determined by what we eat, and the microbiome within us. And that's actually very liberating, because a lot of us say, oh my gosh, mom died of cancer, dad had heart disease, and he had diabetes, and so that's my family history, and that's what I'm going to get. It's absolutely not true. We are in control of our fate, and we're in control of our fate through our mouth.
That's really inspiring. It's also inspiring hearing that you still let your patients teach you.
Oh yeah, the dedication of the plant paradox was to my patients, because really everything in this area of my life that I've learned came from my patients either ask me a question that I didn't know, and I said, I'll find out, or asking me about a supplement, and I go, I know nothing about that, and I'll tell you what, I'm going to try it on myself first, and I'm going to look at my blood work, and I'll get back to you. And so, looking at their blood work every 3 months when we ask them to do things, taught me, everything that I write about in my books. So I'm so grateful to my patients.
Well, I'm really grateful to have you here, and I can't thank you enough.
Well, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Pretty impressive stuff, wouldn't you say? What a champion he is for supplementation and natural approaches towards gaining health and well-being. I am really glad there's people like that in the world of supplementation and natural health, and I am also very excited that we got to share this with you. So thank you very much for tuning in. Next up, we have Dr. Jayson Calton. I have to tell you, I was really impressed with his interview and had some significant takeaways. He is a researcher in the world of supplementation, and there were a couple of things that were very important that we speak about in this interview. The first thing you're going to learn is that there are some fundamental nutrients that all experts agree need to be a part of every person's regimentation. Now, if they are missing, it could lead to some downsides for you that you need to understand, and how to fill in these gaps is a very critical thing. So that was one thing, because you see these experts, they disagree on a lot of things, but what is the common ground? We discussed the common ground. The next thing, and this is really, really important, many people take a bunch of different supplements or maybe even eat certain things with their supplementation, and what Jayson identifies is how two different supplements, each of which might have a beneficial effect, can cancel each other out. They neutralize each other. You need to know what these things are so that when you're taking your supplements, you're not wasting your time and money because you're putting things together that don't belong together. So really, really important information here from a very, very intelligent man. Enjoy this interview with Dr. Jayson Calton. Jayson, thanks so much for sitting to talk with us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about your background, your academic background, and how you got involved in the work that you do.
Well, I have a PhD in biomedical science and human nutrition. And so when I first started in the field of health wellness, I was really helping people to kind of lose weight. That was my main focus. I worked very strongly on a ketogenic style diet back in the 90s.
Wow, nobody was talking about that.
Nobody was talking about keto back then.
How did you arrive at that when nobody else was talking about it?
Well, I stumbled into it. I had been reading some research from Canada, actually, about obese patients using a high-fat diet to lose weight. And I thought to myself, well, that's totally different than what we've been being told, because I was a bodybuilder at the time. So I was the typical low-fat dieter. And I thought to myself, well, if we can use fat to lose fat, it kind of made sense. And the research was showing that it was really doing very well. I thought, I'll try it myself. I'll do one of these N=1 experiments. So I went out and I bought myself mayonnaise and corn oil and egg yolks, and literally I put some sugar-free Kool-Aid into oil and started drinking it, made myself egg yolk omelets and put mayonnaise all over it. And about 7 to 10 days later, I couldn't get out of bed. I was just out flat.
Right.
But before I started to eat carbs, because that's what I thought I needed, I said, well, let's just see what happened during that week period while I was on this high-fat diet. And I got on the scale, and I had a body fat caliper readings done as well. And I had lost 10 pounds, but I had actually gained 5 pounds of muscle and lost 15 pounds of fat. It was a huge fat loss for me. Now, I wasn't necessarily an obese person to start with, but I saw such amazing results with losing fat and gaining muscle with this. I thought to myself, I kind of almost felt like I had been hit over the head because I had found something that I felt was really amazing, but I also knew that I didn't want to feel like that. I couldn't get out of bed and I felt horrible. So
did your colleagues think you were crazy at the time?
They thought I was absolutely insane. Some of my teachers said to me at the time, like, you cannot live without carbohydrates. They literally thought that I would die or that I would become very sick. And of course, I felt like I was dying or becoming very sick. And so I thought to myself, there's something here. I really want to look into this. And one of my clients at the time brought me a book, an old book that they had and said, there's another guy out there named Dr. Atkins who's doing something similar. I started to look at it. And from that moment on, I really wanted to come up with a way to be able to incorporate ketogenic dieting in a way that people could feel good, and do it. And so I did that for years and years and years before I met Mira. I helped people to learn how to use ketogenic dieting along with exercise and micronutrient therapies in order to create whatever kind of health condition they were looking to create.
So where did it lead you? So you're flat on your back, but seeing results. So you start to maybe modify a little after you read Atkins. Maybe did that get you?
Exactly. So I started to get rid of so much of the fat, and obviously not eating so much oil, and realized I just need to have, I need a lot of fat. But I started to kind of convert that to the typical 80-20 concept of ketogenic diet: 80% fat and 20% protein, and started to kind of look at a lot of the roadblocks that were kind of in place at the time. A lot of people thought, well, I just won't eat for a long time. Well, I found that by not eating for, if you go too long without eating in the ketogenic diet, it can cause you to start to store fat when you start to eat again. So that was one of the things we looked at. And we really just kind of delved deep into ketogenic dieting, being able to exercise, losing weight, and then what are the actual benefits of the diet as well? People slept better. ADD, we saw a reduction in ADD. We started to see all the clients that had come to me to lose a few pounds were also coming back and saying, wow, again, I'm sleeping better, my attention is great, I feel so much more energy. And so I thought, well, this is a big piece of the puzzle. It may not be the whole puzzle at that time, but I really felt very strongly about getting people, at least for a short period of time during the year period, to do a ketogenic diet, because I feel like it's a healing state that the body would have naturally gone into, our ancestors' bodies would have gone into as the seasons change. Because as the seasons take away, in the winter months, for most of the world, the plants go into a dormant state, and we would have naturally gone into this ketogenic state. And I feel that, in a world today where we see a rampant diabetes and we see people with with obesity issues, I think that one of the things we're doing is we're using carbohydrates all the time as our primary fuel source, and I think there's some benefit to using fat as the primary fuel source, at least for part of the time.
So cycling in and out of it seems to be something that you're a fan of.
Absolutely, and that's something that I've done more and more as the years have gone on. I really wasn't that interested in micronutrients at the time when I met Mira. Mira was the one who really kind of held the mirror up to my face and said, listen, a ketogenic diet's great, but there's something else here. There's something that's essential to the foundation of health. And of course, we call them essential micronutrients in our society. We know they're essential. We have to have them. So it only stands to reason that if we're deficient in them, our bodies would be showing us some kind of a disease state or a health condition that would be something that people would look at and say, hey, I'm feeling something that's not quite right here. And so with Mira, I started to look at the ketogenic diet and pairing that with the micronutrient therapy. And then that's when things really started to change for the clients.
So leading up to that, so you were in academics, getting your PhD.
Yes.
You got into keto orientation at that point.
Yes.
Now you get your degree.
Yes.
What did you do career-wise?
Well, I opened up a huge center in Orlando. It was we had a health club, we had a day spa, we had an aesthetic plastic surgery center. I saw personal clients. So we opened this huge conglomerate. And actually in 2001, I sold that and retired. I was very successful at what I did, and I retired permanently.
And then how did you meet, your current wife, who, how did that all unfold?
So several years later, there was a case a colleague of mine brought to me. She said, hey, there's this woman who is 30 years old and she's got advanced osteoporosis. And basically the doctor...
Were you in the center at the time or no?
No, this was just a colleague that I had known from the past. And she said, I would be really interested if you could take a look at it and see what you could do about it, because the medical doctors are at their wits' end. They can't seem to figure out why in the world she would have gotten this. This woman is not getting the results that she was hoping for, kind of trying to do it on her own. She had chosen not to take the medication and really tried to do a natural way at reversing osteoporosis. Now, I had never worked with anybody with osteoporosis, but as I said, we had a lot of the clients come back in and said that they started to see a lot of benefits from the program. So I said, well, if we combine this ketogenic diet along with, I'll look at her lifestyle factors, and I was just starting to kind of look at and really become very interested in something called micronutrient competitions. And I'll start to, because obviously osteoporosis is a disease where you're not getting enough minerals, at least at the base level. So I thought, well, let's start with what we know about the competitors in the minerals, and maybe I could take her on and we could see what would happen. And I honestly didn't have a lot of hope. I didn't necessarily tell her that, but I was, honestly, I was kind of, let's see what can happen. I don't know if it's going to work, but I thought that we had a good chance.
So how did you proceed? So now you said, okay, so let's do some of these things, add some of these micronutrients.
So the first thing I did was just get an idea of what she was doing in her life.
Right.
And like she said, she was really following a low-fat diet. She was exercising a lot. She was under a huge amount of stress. The foods that she was eating, they were foods that she thought were good for her, but they were things like low-fat muffins, spinach salads almost every single day, steamed chicken and Chinese vegetables for dinner, things that didn't have a lot of fat in them, things that were high in anti-nutrients, or these are things like factors in food that actually deplete micronutrients when you eat them.
Can you give a few examples of this?
Sure, like spinach contains something called oxalic acid. Oxalic acid is an anti-nutrient that binds to and chelates to calcium. It doesn't allow your body to absorb it. So there's a lot of different anti-nutrients in food, and especially when spinach is eaten raw, that oxalic acid is very high, and this is something she was doing almost every day.
So do you warn people off of spinach completely or in limited amounts? Or
if they're dealing with big micronutrient deficiencies, specifically in the osteoporosis area or a calcium deficiency, then we would. But you can cook spinach and that oxalic acid will reduce. But it is one of the foods that does contain high amounts of these anti-nutrients. And so, if somebody said, I want to do everything perfect, just tell me the perfect diet, that would be one of the foods that we would take out.
Wow, because so many people, go for the spinach salads and spinach
these green
shakes.
smoothies and these green drinks, and they've got beets and they've got raw spinach and a lot of raw cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower and and cabbage, and these type of things should really never be eaten raw because they've got these anti-nutrients in them that do reduce when you cook them or steam them, but are there in great quantities when they're in their raw form.
But you're asserting that they should be, if you want to get to an idealized diet, they should be eliminated altogether. Like I thought broccoli was like one of the best things you could possibly eat. Spinach, for the iron, that women need, that kind of a thing. So you think that they're better avoided, and if you are going to avoid them, what would you substitute for them?
Well, I don't necessarily think they need to be avoided. Things like broccoli steamed or cooked, excellent food choice. Not so much if we're going to eat them raw off the salad bar. Right. Same thing with spinach. If you're eating it raw, that iron that you reference and the calcium that they reference on the nutritional facts are almost reduced entirely because of the oxalic acid in that spinach, unless it's cooked.
Right.
So it's really about understanding how to prepare the foods, and that's one of the things that, again, we learned as we traveled and lived with these indigenous tribes. The preparation of food is something that was really looked upon as a mandatory part of preparing food in the past, and something that we just don't even think about now. We either just eat it raw or pop it in the microwave, or just say, we just have no idea what's in the foods that are depleting our micronutrients and how we can prepare it. So we don't like to say, don't eat these things.
Right.
We like to say, let's learn how we can prepare the foods so that we can reduce the micronutrients that are being taken from the body, and then let's think about ways that we can kind of fill the gaps in of the micronutrients that might be being depleted a lot. So again, we give you a sheet, you write down what your foods are, we'll take a look at the micronutrients that may be being depleted by these anti-nutrients, and then you choose. You can either reduce some of these, change your preparation methods, or you can supplement to kind of fill the gaps in.
So going back though on that, green juicing
Yes.
is a very popular thing right now, and I'm one of them. I mean, I love my green juice.
Yeah.
So if you were to say, okay, here's if there is such a thing, but here's kind of the idea, ingredients of a green juice that you might have, what would you put in? So if you're saying, okay, no raw broccoli, no raw spinach, what would you put in there for a green juice?
You can cook those things and then keep them in the refrigerator and then add them to the juice.
Right.
That would be my number one recommendation.
Okay.
Also, try to use foods that just don't have high tannin levels, oxalic acid, phytic acid. These are going to be things. But the problem is that plants are full of these. So when you go on an all-plant diet or when you're having one of these green drinks, we forget sometimes that plants don't want to be eaten any more than animals want to be eaten. They have their natural defenses against insects, just like animals do. And so these anti-nutrients are often in the leaves or in the plants, so that when the insects or the bugs are eating them, they blow up the guts of those insects. It's a kind of a natural defense. In humans, it doesn't happen like that because we're much larger, obviously. But over time, and given too many of these anti-nutrients in the raw food form, we can start to get leaky gut. We can start to have issues with our digestion, and it can also start to play take a toll on micronutrient absorption.
Well, there goes the raw food diet.
Well, not necessarily, but you just have to learn which foods to eat.
Right.
And again, if you are going to do that, you need to supplement.
Right.
In our world today, it's not just people with raw food or people who are following a vegan or vegetarian diet. Everyone really needs to supplement. The micronutrients just are not in the food.
Right.
We have a lifestyle that's very different than our ancestors. The stress and the toxins that we're facing daily are just pulling out, literally draining us of these micronutrients. So supplementation is imperative, and because it's imperative, it's really important that we start to look at how supplementation is formulated. The multivitamin was really only created about 80 years ago, and it was created by someone just basically throwing a bunch of leaves and rusty nails and rocks and what they thought was, minerals and vitamins and into it just a big pool and drinking the liquid and creating a supplement very similar to that when they made the multivitamin. Just throw everything in one pill and then we'll just take it. Well, that's great.
Right.
But where in our lives do we use technology from 80 years ago? We have supplemental science now. We have scientists who tell us that certain micronutrients compete with one another. They tell us how much of each micronutrient we need. They tell us what forms of these supplements can be absorbed by our body. So let's use that technology and create supplements that we can actually benefit from.
So when it comes to now, just on the diet side, and then we'll talk about the supplementation side, you got vegans, you got raw foodies, you got now the carnivore diet seems to be emerging and all. Does it vary by the person, which, in your opinion, as far as saying this diet might be good for this person, not for the other one, or is there some more generic things that apply to all of us?
I love that question. Okay, so we get it a lot. What's the best diet, and if so, why? We do think there's a best diet, but it's not any of those. It's something that we call the nutrivore diet. So here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with being a vegan. There's nothing wrong with being a carnivore. There's nothing wrong with if you want to fast. Nothing wrong with any of it. In fact, I think that you'd find that there's scientific evidence to show that every one of these different types of diets have actual benefits to them. It really comes down to what you want to do, what makes you feel good. But one thing that is a universal truth in all nutrition and medicine, and there is no dispute over, is that you need to be sufficient in your essential micronutrients or you will get a health condition or a disease. So if that is the universal truth of nutrition, then why shouldn't we look at our diets and make that kind of the first rule? If we're going to be vegan, eat the foods that you feel great about, but make sure that you're getting the essential micronutrients that are just not found in that diet through supplementation. Same thing with a low carb or a diet where we're eating primarily meat. You're going to be missing out on a lot of amazing micronutrients that are in the plant food that you've cut out. Make sure you get it through supplementation. So again, we call this the nutrivore concept.
Right.
We don't make any judgments. And a lot of times people say, well, I'm vegan. Well, 10 years from now, you may not be vegan. I happen to know a lot of vegans who have written books about being vegans who are no longer vegans. And I know a lot of people who follow low-carb diets who are now on a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
This can
I got
change.
one of those over my left shoulder behind the camera.
And it should change because we're changing people. And we should be able to change our minds. But one thing that's never going to change is making sure that we get those essential micronutrients.
So this is brilliant and unique. in saying, hey, there is a universal truth.
Yes.
Because that's really the whole thing, saying, are there some universal principles? In physics, there's the second law of thermodynamics. Well, is there something like that
Yes.
for people pursuing nutrition? And you just named it.
Yes.
So it kind of turns the telescope around a little bit, saying, hey, rather than starting with vegetarianism or veganism versus carnivore versus omnivore or what have you, let's just say that this is the universal truth here.
Yes.
We solidify that and then now run the trail as compared to starting on the trail and trying to run towards it.
Yes.
It's really, you're the first person I've ever heard say that. And we've spoken to a lot of people, but it makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, thank you. We actually put it in our book, Micronutrient Miracle, as the first law of nutritional science, that micronutrient sufficiency is mandatory for optimal health.
Yeah.
And it really is. It's kind of like putting the horse before the cart for a change.
Right.
Instead of making our decisions about one of the most important decisions that we can make daily, what foods we're going to put into our body. Because food is an important thing. Not only does it nourish us, but it's almost a religion to people. Yeah. It's something that it transcends just eating. It's a whole kind of feeling, and it's a spiritual thing for people. And that's great, and I want it to still be that. Right. But at the end of the day, you must get the nutrition from your food, or you're going to be deficient in it. And we have to face the reality that deficiencies in these essential micronutrients equal disease. We're all wondering, what is that thing that we can do nutritionally to protect ourselves from disease and or possibly prevent and reverse the health conditions that we're looking at. And I always say, let's start with the foundation of becoming sufficient in micronutrients. In fact, when we go to these conferences and all of our colleagues, they make fun of this, or they make almost a drinking game out of it. They're like saying, every time Jayson or Mira say micronutrient sufficiency, drink, This is our thing. It's micronutrient sufficiency. It is the basis of where we think you should start. That doesn't mean that there aren't amazing other supplements out there and amazing other things that you can do for your health. We call that icing on top of the proverbial micronutrient cake. Let's bake the cake first, and then you can ice it in any way you want. But what's the point of doing all these other things if your essential micronutrients are deficient?
So now this is interesting how interrelated your academic career, your career beyond academics, your entrepreneurial career, and your romantic life, these things all intersected at some point, right?
They did.
And I think that's kind of a very fortunate thing that, it all comes together and you're living it not in a segmented way, but, holistically your life became that. So you literally, your wife comes to you and she's got a problem to solve and she wasn't your wife at the time, but I'm saying, this person who became your wife.
Yeah.
But beyond that, now in the solution to her problem, matched to your academic background and then also your entrepreneurial experience, something emerges.
Right.
So, she talked about whiteboards,
Yes.
that came out and things that were going on it. So what was it like for you to say, wow, I've met the love of my life, I've got this particular background, and now we get to work together on maybe creating something new in the world?
Yeah, it was just an amazing experience because I was so passionate about health and diet and nutrition, being able to really be that thing that could be there for people, because we need that in our lives. We need something to be able to, if we're not feeling right, if we're told we're starting to get a health condition or a disease, if you've ever been in that situation, you know how frightening that can be. Yeah. And I saw that fear in Mira's eyes. Mira was literally just had so much fear, and she had shame, and there's all these emotions that go into, what did I do to myself? How did I get in this predicament? How can I get out of this? Help me. And I was just so thankful that I had a partner who was willing to do the research and willing to go into this with me and say, you know what, we may not know the answer now, but I think we're in a good position. I think we're heading in the right direction. And when we really started to dig into the research when it comes to micronutrients, I was amazed at how much information was out there. It's really there. The research studies that are published already touch on every single thing that we eventually saw as the basic flaws in supplementation, specifically specifically the multivitamin. And so when we wanted to try to figure out how do we get, we knew we needed to get her body to absorb these things. So of course, we're food first people. Of course, we started in, let's make sure you're taking the food with the highest micronutrient values. Let's cut out those anti-nutrients. Let's stop some of these lifestyle factors that may be reducing it. And we did all that, and that goes a long way. But then to try to understand how now we can take the published research and learn, what do we do to supplementation? How can we kind of biohack this? How can we change it so that it actually will work for us? Because I don't know if you've seen these reports, these magazine reports, Forbes magazine, Time magazine. They're coming out with major front cover stories about the death of the multivitamin. Multivitamins don't work. And that kind of means supplements don't work too. A lot of people are really iffy about, should I be taking supplements? The thing is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Every single individual micronutrient has bookloads of research behind it showing vitamin D really is an amazing supplement. Calcium really is an amazing supplement. Iron really is an important, amazing, essential supplement. But when we put them all together in this multivitamin, all of a sudden the research comes back and says, not such an amazing supplement. Why? Why is it doing that? The answer really comes down to, again, something we've already talked about and something science knows: antagonisms, competitions. So why are we doing that still? Why are we combining? First of all, no food does it. A lot of times people like to point to nature and say, well, why aren't we mimicking that? Well, what food puts every single vitamin and mineral in it or contains that? None. And so why are we doing that with the multivitamin? So that was really the big thing for us, sitting down with that whiteboard, mapping out those competitions and trying to figure out formulations that she could take. And it wasn't easy. We had to give her 2 or 3 pills before breakfast, 3 or 4 after. The same thing, before lunch, same thing before snack, same thing before dinner. 10,000 pills a year, 35 or 36 pills a day.
Wow.
And sometimes we try to open the pills, put it in water to make it more available to her, more absorbable. And half the time that was just, couldn't be done because it was just not palatable. So we really were starting from scratch. Slowly but surely, certain patterns started to emerge. Certain micronutrients could be paired together. Certain ones would be separated. And over time, she started to feel better. And that was really good for me. I started to see her actually physically change. And by 2 years, we felt very confident. She hadn't felt bad for quite a while. We weren't back into the DEXA scan, which is the test that's taken to tell bone density. And she went from advanced osteoporosis to nothing, not even osteopenia. Her bones had completely regenerated.
Wow.
And we were thrilled. We were thrilled to see that this anti-competition theory that we had was actually working.
And in a traditional medical model, that would not be possible. In other words, their view would be, you can't reverse this.
Correct.
It's just something that you live with, even though they don't really get into the etiology, right? They don't really say, well, why would a 30-year-old have this? It's just, oh, you just got bad luck.
They just throw their hands up and say, well, if it's not something we can see on paper, it must be something she's not telling us.
Right.
It must be a genetic thing. Of course, that's what else are we supposed to do, right? We can't explain it. We have a patient who wants to know what's wrong, and we can't figure it out, so they just get stuck in the system. And you see a lot of people like that. Yeah. We also found that there were other research that were published showing how when micronutrients were separated, we started to see an actual response from the supplementation. This happened with lutein and beta carotene. Lutein and beta carotene are known to be competitors, but in the Tozel study, when they finally separated the lutein from the beta carotene in the supplementation that wasn't showing any benefit showed a reversal or improvement in over 80% of the people who had age-related macular degeneration.
Wow.
So we start to see that it's not just osteoporosis, it's other areas too, and that by separating these micronutrients, we really start to see something. It also is not just with vitamins and minerals, it's also with EPA and DHA in our fish oil. So many people now taking fish oil. And they're taking fish oil that combine the EPA and the DHA because that's how it naturally comes. But again, science tells us that these two share a similar structure. So they compete for active receptor sites. What we've done is we've separated the EPA into a morning dose and the DHA into a PM dose so that the body can absorb it all and we get rid of that competition. Again, it's something that we've tried, we have a patent on, and something that we try to implement into all supplementation where it can be of benefit.
So it's fascinating is the themes stay consistent, and it's kind of like these blocks get put in place saying, okay, micronutrients, that's the universal law, if you will. We got to make sure then, because it's like a chain of logic that's not hard to grasp.
Right.
Well, now when you're getting them, you got to make sure they're not competing with each other, so that and then you put them in a form that's absorbable.
Right.
Right. And you follow that trail, and you're going to have results. And you did say the one thing that I think is it was literally the phrase in my mind: "Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater."
Right.
Because just because a certain methodology in supplementation maybe didn't yield results doesn't mean that supplementation won't yield results.
Absolutely.
So don't question the need for supplementations, question the mode of ingesting them or
Right.
or
The
acquiring.
delivery system in general.
Yeah. And that seems to be where your passion has lied, with yourself and your wife now as partners in developing this. And you've also put together, I think, books and tools to help educate people about this. So what are you seeing as the future? Where's this all going?
I think supplementation is the future. I think the same way that we made advancements and are still making advancements in drug and pharmacology, I think we're going to be doing the same thing in supplemental science. And I really think, if we were to put a date on it, I think in supplements, we're back in the 60s, and we need to bring them back up to, into the 21st century. And I think there's a real way that we can do that. I think it is going to be difficult in some ways because, supplement manufacturers, unfortunately, are bound by price. And they don't want to make things too expensive. The consumer is used to paying, $19, $20 for a supplement in general, and they're willing to pay a little bit more where the research is and the evidence is there. But in all, people don't want to take too many supplements. They don't want to have something that has too many pills. Mira mentioned, a lot. If you're going to put everything that you actually need into a multivitamin, you're going to be taking 8 to 10 pills a day.
Right.
People have to get used to that idea that you're not going to be able to just take one pill and get everything that you need. The good news is the knowledge is there. The research is there. We know how to change supplements for the better. Now we have to get the consumers on board and educate them as to why it's important potentially to spend maybe a little bit more money on it, why it's important to not just choose what's on sale or listen to that 16-year-old in the GNC who's chewing gum and is like, oh, well, this one's on sale. That's pretty good, because that's how a lot of people choose their supplements. They haven't been taught, and they're intimidated. So they walk into the health food store and just say, I'm here, I'm looking for a calcium supplement. My doctor told me I need one. What's a good one?
Right.
Honestly, that person behind the counter may know, but probably doesn't know what's best for them. And so it is going to take some education on their part. But that's why we write the books. We write the books in such a way that they aren't lectures. You may be listening to me now and I might sound kind of lecture-y, and I tend to have that tone to my voice. But my wife, on the other end, is very bubbly and very happy and makes things very, very easy to understand. And so we make a great team, because I'm going to make sure that all the research is in these books, and she's going to make sure that they're put in such a way in stories and analogies that are easy to understand. So if you're looking to educate yourself, I think you can start with some of our books, because we're going to talk to you about what micronutrients are. Why are we deficient where we are now? What can I do in my life that's not going to be supplement-wise? What can I do about my food? What foods should I be eating? What can I do with my lifestyle so that I can get as many as I can? And then very last, because it really does come last, it's how do I choose the supplements now that are going to fill those few little last remaining gaps that I have, so that I can experience what it feels like to be micronutrient sufficient, so that my body can do what it's supposed to do for me health-wise.
It's interesting. It's sort of like the tail is wagging the dog. It's like here's what consumers expect, therefore we're going to try to fit into that, as compared to saying we have to recast the expectations of the consumer so they can actually get the benefit of what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So and that I think that could be done. I think there's enough impetus on people wanting to gain health that they'll say, okay, if I'm wrong in my behaviors towards this and my thinking, maybe I can correct that. So hopefully you'll go your work and your wife's work together will go a long way toward correcting that in the consumer mindset.
Well, thank you, and I think I agree with you. I think it can be done, and one of the things the consumers can do to prove it to themselves is they can have these tests done, and that's the great thing. That's where medical science and nutrition can really come together. We can get these blood tests done, see what in hard science what they're deficient in, what we're not getting enough of, where the inflammation is, and then you can use supplements and you can test again and you can see the results. You don't have to fly blind. You can literally see, oh, now that I'm using this EPA and DHA that's been separated, I can see that my omega-3 levels are increasing, whereas when I was using the other one, they weren't increasing so much. So we can get some proof, and I think that can really help us as consumers to be able to say, That makes a lot of sense to me, and I feel comfortable moving forward with that now because I see real results.
Well, excellent, very informative. Really appreciate not only the information, but the passion behind it that drives it all. So thanks very much for taking the time to share it with us.
Thanks for having me.
I was especially excited to bring this interview to you because there are takeaways from it that you can put on the ground right now. I hope you took notes. I hope you got as much benefit from it as I did. I really feel like this was a part of what we're trying to bring to you in Supplements Revealed, learning the right practices and avoiding the bad ones. So thanks for tuning in for that one. Next up, we have Dr. Brian Haycock. Did you know that when you're deficient in nutrients, that your body's ability to absorb them goes up? The body's very intelligent. It's looking for them. And this has an impact on what supplements you should take, or maybe even sometimes you shouldn't be taking supplements. Brian Haycock is a researcher. He spent a lot of time and a lot of years looking at varying aspects of the body, how it interacts with supplements and nutrients, and what kinds of things we need to know. Also, he's got an opinion on the organic thing. Many of our experts weigh in on that. Is it important to have organic supplements? Is it not important? Should you spend the extra money? I've seen varying opinions on this. You're going to get one in this interview also. So enjoy this. There's a lot of great content, deep information here from a person who is an eminent expert in this arena, Dr. Brian Haycock. So Brian, looking forward to our conversation. Many things said about you in anticipation, but two of which are, number one, you're the man to talk to about supplementation, and number two, you're overly humble. So,
there's no response for that. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Exactly. He's arrogant if he talks
Right.
speaks with authority, and he's
If
humble
I deny
if he
it,
doesn't.
I'm being humble. Yeah.
So we'll see how to get all this great information out of you and still keep your comfort zones in the meantime. So how did you get involved in the world of supplementation?
Well, professionally, I got started while I was in college. I had a natural curiosity for the body and nutrition, and both on the pharmaceutical side and on the dietary supplement side. And of course, when you get into college, you have your opportunity to dig in as deep as you want. In an effort to make money, I thought I might see if anybody had any need for somebody who just read dietary supplement, studies all day. And in fact, there were companies who sell dietary supplements need what are called substantiation portfolios. Mm-hmm. So when they make a claim about their product, they, according to the FDA, you need 2 double-blind placebo-controlled studies that would qualify as evidence to support your claim. Mm-hmm. So I was able to use my time at the university in the medical libraries, working for companies who are selling products, making claims about those products. I could then go to the library, look up the data, see if there's any research on it, and as a contractor, put those portfolios together and send them to them.
Was that fulfilling work for you?
Yeah, unfortunately, sometimes it worked out really well. Mm-hmm. There was great products making great claims. At other times, there were other companies with bad products making bad claims, and there's literally nothing to support their claims. Mm-hmm. And you feel a lot of pressure when you're supposed to be providing the support for claims, and they don't realize or aren't particularly concerned with the fact that there isn't really support for the claims.
Is that a little bit backwards? I mean, is it supposed to be
Yes,
first
you're
you figure out
supposed
what
to.
you got, and then you go out and
Yes,
saying,
it
hey,
is.
here's our claim, go make it valid.
It is absolutely backwards, and you have all kinds in the industry, about the industry, and I don't want to get on a tangent if it is one, but there are low barriers to entry in the industry. You really don't need to know about dietary supplements or regulations or even human nutrition. There are contract manufacturers who can give you a turnkey solution. They will design the product, formulate the product, create a label for you, and even handle logistics for shipping and put up a website for you. All you have to do is bankroll it. Mm-hmm. So depending on their whims, they can sell products that really aren't very good products.
So this is interesting. So you referred to this as a low barrier to entry, and I guess this is one of the things that creates the I'll call it the chaos in the supplement
Yeah, it's
industry.
a Wild West.
It's
Yeah,
a Wild
it is.
West chaos where somebody say, hey, I want to enter this arena. I'm a marketer. I'm a great marketer.
Yes.
Now I need a product.
Right.
And I can go to a contract manufacturer and say, can you formulate something in this
I want
realm?
something that does this.
Yeah. And are they pretty much, are the formulators usually people of some expertise at least? Or
Well, whether they're of any expertise or not at these contract manufacturers, they aren't liable for the product. The person who's selling the product, putting it on the shelf, is who's ultimately liable for the claims that are being made.
Can they pick, and this is actually a very interesting question, can the person who is hiring the contract manufacturer piggyback on their liability policies?
No.
So they become responsible then
Yeah,
completely.
they are responsible
Yeah.
for it ultimately because they are the ones who put it in front of the public
Yeah.
to get the money for the product based on the claims.
So this leads to another question, which is the regulation side of this. Because people say, because we described it as Wild Wild West from the business context of
Right.
it, but certainly there are some regulatory parameters around this industry that do apply. It's not completely unregulated, right?
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest misconceptions about the dietary supplement industry is that it is not regulated. That's the groupthink. That's the public notion.
Right.
So it's a difficult one to battle because you will continually hear the message that it isn't, in fact, regulated.
And that's the risk. It's an unregulated industry. But
Right.
reality,
That's the argument against that. You can't trust the manufacturers. You can't trust the products. They could be dangerous. You have no idea what's in them. All of these claims aren't, in fact, true.
Yeah, so digging into that a little further, I mean, maybe it's the fact that it's not regulated like the pharmaceutical industry in the sense of, what FDA requires.
You're exactly right.
And but nonetheless, there's the Federal Trade Commission that warrants that you have to tell the truth about what's in your thing and what claims you make about it.
That's right. There's interesting differences between the way pharmaceuticals are regulated and the way dietary supplements are regulated. Pharmaceuticals are regulated on a cost-benefit or a risk-benefit analysis. So in order for a drug company to bring a new drug to market, they have to do the clinical trials and present the evidence that this drug will, in fact, do what the company is claiming that it will do. But in the process, should that drug cause depression, suicide, even death, uncontrollable movements that may become permanent. You've heard all these in this fine print on commercials. It's okay as long as the benefit is deemed adequate to balance that risk. So you can have what I would call a meaningful percentage of patients that would experience life-altering side effects during these drug trials, but it would still get approved. For a dietary supplement, there can be zero risk. On the other hand, you do not have to prove its efficacy. And that's the trade-off.
Interesting.
So the FDA says, okay, if you're going to sell a drug that may kill people, you at least have to demonstrate that it will do something.
Right.
So that everybody involved can at least claim, yes, but it does this thing for you. It adds, a month of life.
Hence, it becomes a legend drug saying you have to have an expert that gives this to you. You just can't go buy it off a shelf.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. For dietary supplements, there can be no risk. And the way dietary supplements are introduced to the market, the FDA has to be notified 70 days in advance that a product is going to be introduced to the market. 30 days before it's put there, the claims that are going to be made for it have to be submitted to the FDA, and then you can market the product. All during that procedure, the FDA does not respond to you with a accepted and approved kind of letter. It's simply, we've received your submission. And that is done so that they can, at some time in the future, at their discretion, take the product off the market should they deem that it is not a safe product. So they never, you still have to submit what you're going to introduce to the market. They don't approve it, and then they can, at their discretion, remove the product from the market should some later adverse event be reported that would generate enough concern that they would remove the product.
So in essence, it's a registration. Right?
It's a registration.
So you're just saying we're registering it. We don't have to wait for any particular approval from you, but you know that we're transacting this business.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, and you had mentioned the Federal Trade Commission. And the Federal Trade Commission work together with the FDA. The FDA is mostly concerned with protecting the public's health, protecting the public from harm. And the FTC is primarily concerned with false claims, claims that might be misleading in some way. And for dietary supplements, that includes implied claims. So if you make a claim, let's say, for example, that this product supports heart health, you're implying that it would prevent a heart attack or some high blood pressure or whatnot, even though that's not what you're claiming. A reasonable person might interpret that claim to mean such.
Right.
And the FTC requires you to have substantiation not only for the claim that you're making, but also to be able to support whatever implied claims an individual might be gathering from what you're saying.
Now, this is very interesting because many of the supplements on the market, especially ones that are sold like on TV and so on, that are, let's say there aren't, human trials,
Right.
Substantiating a specific, outcome or specific effect. Normally, that's what they'll say. Well, it supports, liver health, supports, et cetera. But you're saying that there's implied claims there, so they still need some evidence to say that it is supportive in those realms. Like take a milk thistle, for example, and liver health.
Right.
A lot of people say this supports healthy liver function.
Right.
But what would be their burden to say that this is true, or that's an implied claim that they can get away with it?
Well, that's a good question, because there is no burden until there's a challenge. So they can sell as much of the product as they wish, making any kind of claims they wish, until there's a challenge either from the FDA or the FTC. But lo and behold, today, the number of cases that are brought against companies from the FDA are almost nil because of the current regulations that are in place. The Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act has given the FDA enough control over how those products are manufactured and marketed. Everybody must comply, and by definition of regulation, if you do not comply, you go to jail. I would call that regulation,
Yes,
right?
that's definitely regulated, yeah.
And the FTC is looking for misleading claims, but they don't get involved a lot because it's literally a lack of resources. Okay, so the laws are there, but they're not being adequately enforced. And this is where class actions come in.
Yeah.
So the biggest risk to any dietary supplement company as far as their claims go is actually from class action, not from the FTC, not from the FDA.
That's interesting.
The only real players in the industry that are at risk from FTC and FDA are the very large companies that are, $500 million plus per year in revenue from these products. Usually you'll find the products in food, drug, and mass channels, not internet, not direct to consumer, not multi-levels. Because if the FDA and the FTC is going to get involved, they know that if they were to move against a large, most of the time multinational type of company, these consumer packaged goods companies that buy the supplement brands for the supermarket and that it will send a wave of precaution throughout the industry, and one move against a large company really slows everybody down.
Reverberates.
Right?
Yeah.
It reverberates
Yeah.
and has a big impact. One, if they were to try to go after the fly-by-night kind of internet companies, start up, take your money, disappear, one, it's like whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
There's literally no way to regulate that. And two, that there isn't even enough manpower to devote towards that.
Right.
And that is the inevitable, buyer beware nature of dietary supplements. And any consumer can be advised in such a way as to learn how to avoid those types of companies and avoid those types of products.
And that's the advice we want to give them.
Right.
So, given the regulatory side of the manufacturing of supplements, et cetera, there's countless amounts of supplement brands out there. Everything from, like they said, the small little ones on an internet site to billion-dollar plus supplement companies.
Yes.
How many manufacturers are there, or is there just a small amount of manufacturers making like 90% of the supplements on the market under different labels?
As far as the products themselves, there's actually more of a limited number of ingredient suppliers.
Ah, that's interesting. So we're going up a level from the manufacturer.
Yeah, you're going back to the source. There are very large companies that are supplying ingredients to a large percentage of all dietary supplement marketers.
Can we give an example like fish oil? Like, are there just a few fish oil
There are
people?
actually just a few fish oil companies. And that's why when people come to me and they say, oh, which one should I pick? I say,
They're not
it's
that
not going to
different.
matter. It's really not going to matter.
Right.
But, even within those channels, the supply channels, you do want to ensure that you have a quality supply channel, traceability back to the source and each of the stages in which that ingredient has traveled before it ends up at the manufacturing facility. Also, countries of origin. It used to be, of course, that ingredients from China were always suspect. Several years ago, we had the melamine fiasco in baby formulas, where it's not a real protein, but being counted as a protein content in those products. Since then, however, China has felt the impact of that reputation, the damage that comes from that, and has really stepped up, and many ingredient suppliers in China now are GMP compliant according to U.S. standards.
Interesting.
And a lot, of course, the manufacturers are demanding that. There's been some improvements in India as well, China and India being the largest supply countries to the dietary supplement industry.
Wow, so those are the two largest suppliers of source elements for supplements, is
Yes.
China and India.
Yes.
Interesting.
And that's because of economies of scale, right? They can produce tremendous amounts of this material at pennies on the dollar compared to, for example, Europe or the United States. And that's where you kind of get some boutique products, right, that will say, well, we refuse any ingredients for this country or that country. We will only accept ingredients from this country and that country. And they're certainly free to do that, but consumers need to know that it isn't necessarily that you're getting a higher quality product, you're just spending more for it.
Right.
If a company is, in fact, GMP compliant, and according to GMP regulations, the company who's going to make the product with that ingredient does all the necessary testing to prove that it is, in fact, 99%, whatever it says it is, free of contaminants, free of microbials, free of all that. It's literally no different than a more expensive source for that ingredient.
So let's review those variables for a second. So we're saying we've got the source elements coming in. That's one variable. The second one is the person or the manufacturer who receives these source elements.
Yes.
Now, you're saying that manufacturer should have some of their own lab testing to validate that the source elements...
They are required by law.
Oh, they're required. Okay.
By law.
It's not even an option.
Yes,
Okay.
they must do identity testing. And
So you can feel good then that if there's a Chinese manufacturer who's claiming GMP, and again, I would always be suspect at this point because of just what's happened in the past, but it's secondarily validated by, let's say, the American manufacturer who says, hey, we're taking the source element and formulating, and we're going to validate that what they say is really
right.
Okay.
Because the FDA will not allow an American manufacturer to go, oh, but we didn't know. We took their word for it.
They're responsible no
That
matter
does
what.
not fly.
Okay.
Right? So,
can't point fingers.
No.
Yeah.
No. The manufacturer is absolutely responsible for what's put into that product, regardless of where it was sourced.
Interesting.
So, according to law, again, this is part of the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act that was implemented in 1994. There's a long, of course, list. There's positions at supplement companies that your sole job is to check the manufacturing and go down the list that everybody's compliant with these good manufacturing practices. And you will be randomly audited as well by FDA.
Yeah, so this is, I think you're speaking to, again, on a deeper level, very regulated. I mean, that's
yes, it is.
That's some pretty, deep compliance, for people to make these supplements and be able to distribute them in the United States.
Again, and so that relates to safety. Right? And what I would call purity or sanity, you know that it wasn't made in somebody's garage, right?
Yeah.
This is made in a sterile environment. And in fact, a large dietary supplement company that I worked for, not only were they GMP compliant, but they were drug compliant. So all the supplements were made under drug standards, which was slightly higher, and there's a number of differences in the facilities and the way materials are handled and recorded. But
when people use the term nutraceutical, is that what they're referring to?
no.
Okay, then
That's
that
a
confuses
very
people,
good
right?
question. But again, that regulation doesn't dictate that this product that you buy is going to do what it says on the label.
Right.
Now, if you're saying they aren't regulated for efficacy, that's fine. I have no argument with that. But to simply say you have no idea what's in it, could be dangerous, that's just false.
Okay. So is nutraceutical just kind of a made-up term?
It is. It was made up in the 90s to differentiate. So originally dietary supplements were, well, the first one was cod liver oil, right? In the 20s and 30s, knowledge about vitamins and minerals began to appear in academia. Okay, they began to identify vitamin A. Well, that's our first one. Vitamin B1, that's our first B vitamin, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And by the 30s, there was some public awareness of this notion of vitamins, right? And the first dietary supplement was a cod liver oil. And later, I think in maybe late 30s, early 40s, a company called Nutrilite introduced the first what we would call a multivitamin product that was just dried juice from fruits and vegetables and pressed into a tablet.
Okay.
Right? And that was technically a dietary supplement. So today, things that fall under the category of dietary supplements are nutrients, and that's your vitamin, minerals, essential oils like omega-3s and other types of fats. Then you have what would be called herbal extracts or herbals, right? They have no nutritional value, but they have chemical constituents that have some sort of physiological effect on your body. And then you have other products that are what you would call metabolites. And these aren't necessarily essential nutrients, but they are products involved in human metabolism that could be a bottleneck for some desired training effect or whatnot. An example might be HMB. HMB is a leucine metabolite that isn't essential but has been found to have some impact on protein metabolism and whatnot. So you have those three different categories. Vitamins and minerals are not going to really harm you. There are, of course, your fat solubles that need to be watched for kids, not to take a bunch. But then you have the herbals and the herbal extracts, which are, in fact, chemicals no different, essentially, than a drug. It's still in the plant, or it has been extracted to some standardized amount. And there really, essentially, is no difference between that type of chemical and a drug, except for what you can say about it. The FDA defines a drug not by what it does, but by how you describe it. Okay?
So what do you mean by that?
So vitamin C, for example, if I were to say vitamin C supports the immune system, it is a dietary supplement. If I were to say vitamin C reduces the incidence and duration of the common cold, it is now a new drug. And the FDA would say, oh, you're selling an unapproved new drug.
Right.
Cease and desist. Well, of course it's not a new drug. It's just vitamin C.
Right.
But the law is written according to the language that's used to sell it. And that's why on every dietary supplement product, you'll say this product was not intended to treat, mitigate, cure any disease.
So along those lines, just for clarity, they now have certain fish oils that are prescription fish oils, right?
Absolutely.
Now, if you were to lab test that prescription fish oil versus a normal fish oil that you might buy over the, off the shelf, are they different?
No. and in fact, the same suppliers of those, well, it's very high concentration fish oil. It's usually 85 to 90% omega-3s. That same material is marketed to supplement manufacturers for their products.
From the same
identical. Same company.
So it's not even similar, it's identical.
It is identical. It's the same source.
So isn't it funny that there's a prescription, and so the only difference is the claims that are made about the prescription, which make it a drug versus...
Right, that's right. Your prescription omega-3 will say lowers your triglycerides.
Right.
And your dietary supplement will say supports heart health.
Right.
Same product.
Same product.
But of course, the pharmaceutical company... they're irked by the fact that this stuff is out there.
Right.
So it behooves them to put out messaging that dissuades people from buying them. Right. And so you say, well, they're dangerous, it's unregulated, you really don't want to...
And that's where those flames get fanned a lot of times by the pharmaceutical industry.
Absolutely.
So that they can try to, grab more of the real estate attached to this, saying, hey, you know, we do it on this level.
Right.
We're regulated.
You can only trust us.
Right. Right. Interesting. So now where we're at is that we have source materials, we have manufacturing practices, and then we have certain claims that are made. And a lot of the, hundreds of different brands of vitamins put out there are coming from just a handful of common sources in the beginning. Yet the price variation is extraordinary.
Yes.
So is there anything about the manufacturing process that would say this makes this worth more than this one, even though they have the same sources?
Yes, but not as a general rule. So there are expensive ways to extract chemicals from herbs. CO2 extraction, for example, is more expensive than a simple chemical extraction where you rinse it and, so you use solubility, whether it's water soluble or soluble in acetone or whatnot. So there are more expensive ways to extract chemicals from herbs, and that would essentially be reflected in the price of the raw material to the manufacturer of the product. However, if an ingredient is an ingredient, for let's say chromium, right? It's been around for a long time. Chromium is chromium. It doesn't matter where it comes from. Right. As far as your body is concerned, chromium is chromium. But you do get into a situation where customers will develop a relationship of trust with a brand. And regardless of the cost differential, they want to stick with that brand. And that brand can ratchet up the price or introduce the brand at a higher price based on that knowledge that we can develop consumer trust and charge. Obviously, they're going to sacrifice volume, but they make up for it in margins. Right. So everybody that comes into the industry is going to have to choose, am I going to sell commodity products that have hundreds of competitors that are similar in the label and composition, or am I going to come out with what would call a premium product where I'm going to charge double and then have some sort of story behind it to justify the cost? In reality, the nutritional value of the products generally aren't closely related to the difference in cost.
But I have to imagine, I know there's varying stories. There's organic. Maybe there's organic sources that would have an impact.
Non-GMOs.
Non-GMOs. That's another thing. I see now also something that's pretty popular is fermented. Things that are more alive, if you will, that are encapsulated. So
that's interesting and relates to trends.
So talk about that. When you say trends, so you're saying that sometimes there's trends that are...
Well, it's like, where's the industry going? All of those things will add cost. For example, if a company wants to distribute in Europe as well as the United States, all products in Europe have to be non-GMO. Whereas in the U.S., no, it just depends on what they think their customer is looking for. That will significantly add to the cost because non-GMO, to have that certification, when you have a complicated supply chain, particularly anything that comes from corn, soy, the big commodity crops in the United States, particularly with corn, if you put a GMO crop next to a non-GMO crop, wind blows, lo and behold, now you have GMO on both crops. Right. Because that's just the nature of pollination and that kind of thing. It's just the nature of it. So, really proving that some of those commodity crops are non-GMO is extremely difficult in the United States. But again, that does add to the cost. The organic, of course, is going to add to the cost.
Sure.
Gluten-free doesn't add to the cost because very few things have gluten, but they throw it on there
anyway. It on there
just so it's gluten-free. Never had gluten in it, but...
So, in your view, do you think having organic and non-GMO supplements is worth the extra cost?
From a nutritional perspective, no. From a business model perspective, you are meeting supply and demand, and if the demand is that we demand this and this, well, you should get in line, or you're going to be falling back to the end.
But you personally, if you're taking a supplement, you don't care if it's organic or not?
No.
Interesting. Okay. And then now the trend you're talking about,
I'm behind the scenes, right? I'm behind the curtain. And due to the nature of my work, I'm swimming in this research all the time.
Right.
Swimming in the data from the organic proponents, the non-organic proponents, the non-GMO proponents, or, once you weigh all of the data, there aren't strong positions to take on either side. Reality is somewhere in the middle, a lot of uncertainties. It might be better for you, it might not. There's always the argument that organic produce is better for you. Well, it's possible that organic produce can be better for you, but the nature of the soil at the time that organic crop is planted isn't guaranteed to be in better shape than some other soil somewhere else. So you can start an organic farm in a place that has bad soil, and you're not going to have organic produce that is higher nutrients than a non-organic, because the soil there is not great. Even though you've complied with all the organic, it has no pesticides and all that, but the nutritional value of the product is not going to be different, simply because it's determined on the soil, which varies around the country, around the world, even from year to year. So, in addition to that, there isn't enough land in the United States for all produce to be organic. We literally could not produce it because there's enough space. So organic becomes a luxury. And I'm not saying it's bad. And from the standpoint of protecting the environment, humane treatment of animals, I am all for organic. But there has to be some level of practicality to where the volume of food that this country demands can't be met with organic. So there's always only going to be a select few, a portion of the population who's going to have access to that. And that would be a luxury as opposed to, we're just not doing this because we're all, belligerent or whatever. It's just a matter of practicality. It's just not possible.
And the other thing we talked about were trends, saying, so fermented nutrients as a trend. So what do you see as the trends?
The microbiome. Okay, so the microbiome, technically the term microbiome refers to DNA. So it refers to all of the DNA that is not human DNA that is found in and on your body. We generally, in looser terms, refer to it as just all the bacteria, right? So your microbiome is the bacteria that's in and on your body. Before, I would say maybe 5 or 6 years ago, the microbiome was really seen as kind of stowaway bacteria, or just there for convenience, right? They found a place where they could live and they eat off our food and it doesn't bother us. Since then, the knowledge has changed and we realize that the microbiome is a fundamental component of human health, right? If you have a 3-legged stool, you have physical activity, you have nutrition, and then you have your microbiome. Those 3 components really are determining the health of the individual. And there are any number of reasons why the traditional Western diet and lifestyle has damaged over the generations the microbiome. Today we see more and more food sensitivities every year with kids and everything. You may say, well, what's all this gluten thing about? Why is everybody now sensitive to gluten? What did they do to the bread? It's like, well, they didn't do anything to the bread. The bread's the same bread it's always been. But the microbiome has lost its ability to regulate inflammatory reactions, sensitivities in our gut that normally would not be bothered by gluten of any kind and like that. So it's not that gluten has become bad for people, it's that people's microbiome has become dysbiotic, or they're in a state of dysbiosis.
And what causes that?
A reduced variety of food. Things that support the microbiome, first and foremost, are fibers from fresh fruits and vegetables, right? Things that damage the microbiome are high saturated fats, trans fats, sugar, high sugar loads, and, believe it or not, sedentary lifestyle, right? So what I described with high fat, sugar, and sedentary is a Western diet, essentially, devoid of fiber because people don't like the way fiber makes their hamburger buns feel in their mouths, right? So you rip all the fiber out and you have this wonderful
gooey,
doughy bread, right? As kids used to get bread and wad it up in a dough. Turns out as we've removed that in an effort to really maximize profits to get people to consume processed foods, our health has been damaged. And one of the primary areas of damage has been the microbiome. And eventually you get extinction of certain species of bugs that are good for you because there's just no support for them.
So how does the idea of fermented source nutrients in a supplement address that?
Well, fermentation, the process of fermentation, is the same process that all those bugs do in your gut when you eat food. They ferment or metabolize the food for their own purposes. They eat it, right? After eating it, they release byproducts, metabolites, and even waste products that support the health of not only our gastrointestinal tract, but also play an important role in modulating our immune system, particularly inflammation and allergies. So the increase in asthma, peanut allergies, gluten, all of those things are now believed to be directly related to the microbiome.
Well,
and the solution is, yes, eat more fermented foods. You're getting essentially the beneficial, what they call small molecules from bacterial or sometimes yeasts, probiotic yeast, metabolites in that fermented, whether it's a food like, kefir or yogurt or sauerkraut or kombucha, whatever it is, those beneficial components that are produced by those microorganisms, you're just putting them directly into your body. It's kind of like fertilizing a field with a truck or putting cows out there, right? If you put the bugs in, you're putting the cows out there. If you bring in the truck, well, you're eating a fermentate. But the fermentates are going to trend. Not just because they're, right now you have a group of advocates that love everything fermented, right? If you can ferment it, do it. It's kind of like, will it blend? I don't know, the guy puts everything, will it blend? You throw it in there. We have the same type of mentality now. Can we ferment it? Yeah. Which, more power to them. It's absolutely good for you. It's good for kids and no harm whatsoever. There may be limitations to live bacteria in the form of probiotics. One, the majority of them do not colonize permanently. So if they're not naturally there and they're not going to stay there, the benefits of them taking them only occur while you're taking them. Using a fermentate in addition to what would be called a prebiotic, which is a fiber that would feed good bacteria only, is going to be the normal and more effective strategy for improving the microbiome.
So with all these probiotics, because now we'll switch gears into that, that's a very popular category of a supplement right now is probiotics. And all the major supplement companies and some very minor ones are coming out with probiotics.
And big drug companies as well, who will not refer to them as probiotics to differentiate themselves from dietary supplement.
What do they call them?
Live microorganism.
Live micro, okay.
But you cannot say probiotic. You'll be shunned, right? I go to the conferences all the time. They're looking to genetically alter the bacteria to produce the desired chemicals. So you take a genetically altered bacteria and put it in your body. It could even produce a prescription drug. So a lot of drugs are produced through fermentation processes.
Is that scary? Starting to genetically alter microbes.
It's creative.
Yeah, it's creative for sure, but I start to feel like an experiment.
It is, but it's the pharmaceutical approach to health.
Yeah.
Right? You manipulate the machine with the sledgehammer. You don't tune it up.
Yeah.
You manipulate it. On the other hand, the dietary supplement industry certainly is, everybody has a probiotic, and if you don't, you're working on it.
Right.
You just need a little more time. Unfortunately, if you do a man on the street or you go out on the corner and you ask people, what is a probiotic? They'll stare and they'll think and they'll say, well, isn't that a yogurt or something like that? Well, what do they do? Their level of understanding of what probiotics is far beneath what the industry is kind of assuming. So there's a lot of effort being put into very technical clinical trials with probiotics to demonstrate improvement in the integrity of the lining of the gut, these tight junctures, and inflammation and all these things. It's way beyond the understanding of any consumer. That clinical data does very little to support a brand per se from a marketing perspective.
In general, do you think that that they're valuable? In other words, I hear controversy around can the
They're being
probiotic
attacked
actually
now.
get through the stomach, and is it really delivering the benefit, or is it all?
Yeah, that's a good question, and they really are under attack right now. I was in a doctor's office the other day. I was telling a patient that, well, we know now that probiotics can be harmful, and you can get an colonization, and it could be dangerous. That's from one mouse study that came out, 6 months ago, with a clear bias against the unregulated sale of probiotics.
Right.
It was a hit job, right? And it's successful.
Well, incidentally, so because I'm seeing that about coconut oil too, right? Now, the more people are trying to say that this is a bad thing as compared to a great thing.
Well, they have to move on to the next thing.
Yeah,
so
of course.
Discredit the last thing.
But because you're somebody who's a literature reviewer, I mean, that this is a big part of your life for so many years. Maybe you could speak to how political the published science can become.
Oh, yeah. Well, peer review is not a perfect process. Peer review is the process in which a journal will have a number of experts in the field review new research before they're willing to publish it. Some of those reviewers will actually read it, other ones don't. It can pass by. An example of that recently was some papers that were nonsense papers published. For example, one was about dog rape culture in parks. And it was published.
And it got past peer review?
It was published,
oh
yes.
My God.
And did some heads roll for that? Yes, absolutely. But it demonstrated a point that there's a lot of bias in medical publishing, and it's not perfect.
Well, you just used the term hit job.
Yeah.
You're saying, okay, so literally something was published about overcolonization as a result of probiotics.
In mice.
Which somebody had an agenda to want to, plant a seed of doubt in the whole probiotic world. And it passed peer review, got in there.
Yeah.
So I guess the point is, we try to say, hey, there's standards and there's got to be peer-reviewed literature with a certain amount of, blinded controlled trials that, will bring this to the surface. But simultaneously, you can't really trust that process either.
Well, nothing's going to be perfect. And anytime you have bias, and just human nature, you'll have bias. You can claim you don't.
Right.
But you're going to have
bias
inescapable in the way you interpret the data and present it. The media will take either the headline or a single line from the conclusions that the authors wrote.
Right.
And that conclusion is, this study means this. Right? And then the title is like unto it, right? So the media just gets literally what that researcher thinks that experiment meant, providing no information as to what was actually done and why the results might be the way they are.
And I find this to be a big issue. And again, for the average consumer, there's no way they have the wherewithal or the time to want to get into this. But what you just said, I find to be profound in my experience, saying that people who just try to take a soundbite out of an abstract or a soundbite out of the conclusion and say this is what was studied, what was learned, or what was discovered, it's typically a complete misrepresentation as to what the actual research is.
Absolutely.
So now it defines a problem. And I'd love for you to speak to this. The problem is that consumers have a desire to want to invest in their health.
Yeah.
And they have a desire in part to put some of that investment, or a large part of that investment, into supplementation.
Yes.
And there are bad actors out there. There are high integrity people out there. If somebody is watching us right now and they're saying, okay, you've defined the landscape to a large degree. What can I do to try to separate good stuff from bad stuff?
Well, at the simplest level, buy products that you could trust. Now, how do you know you can trust it? Well, for one, if you buy a large brand product, right, a brand that you would find, in a large box chain, for example.
A big pharmacy store.
Big pharmacy, big grocery, big box channels. The companies who are making those products cannot afford to have legal action brought against them. It will cost them tens of millions, if not $100 million, right? they will abide by all the rules. GMP, true claims, substantiated claims. And because of the actions of a few years ago of the New York Attorney General bringing a case against some supplements, the retailers were then also brought into that lawsuit.
Wow. So,
After that time, retailers are now demanding of the companies who want to sell their products on their shelves that they provide them with the substantiation for their claims. That was my job, is to go into those retailers and say, here's why we think we can say what we're saying.
so let me ask this based on that. I've got some experts saying, those multivitamins that are sold on TV
Yeah.
and they drive people straight into the big box stores to buy them,
Yeah.
et cetera, but they're crap. You're creating expensive urine. You're just wasting your money,
Yeah.
because they're cheap. What's your view? Are those multivitamins that are pushed out there in a very commercial way on a mass scale? Are they crap or?
Well, if you have a nutrient deficiency, even the worst multivitamin mineral will fix that nutrient deficiency.
Really?
Yeah.
Fix it. I mean, not
Yes.
just.
Yes. The components in the vitamin and mineral are absorbed into the body, and if they're water soluble, quickly go into the body's fluid and out the kidneys, and yes, back in the toilet. However, it's assumed that you're also eating food,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it is a dietary supplement
Right.
that you're adding to a nutrient deficient or insufficient diet. So you don't have to have 100% of whatever's in this product get in. You just need to supplement the food that you're eating. And large studies have been done to look at what percentage of the population in the United States is nutrient deficient. We eat a ton of food, right? And even eating nutritionally poor food, if you eat enough of it, you end up with adequate amounts of nutrients.
Right.
And that's really kind of the situation that the United States is in. Now, there are instances, particularly in the elderly and children, people who are extremely active, whatever, obsessive dieters, all those things, who do and should supplement their diet because they're intentionally or unintentionally not eating adequately. But again, the complaints against, just that generic hard tablet that you see that you can buy in a cheap bottle at the grocery store really are unfounded, in that if you take too much of that hard pill, you could experience a nutrient toxicity if you ate the whole bottle. Right? And nobody would argue with that. Well, of course, you eat the whole thing. Well, wait a minute. A minute ago, you're telling me nothing gets in, and now you're telling me you do agree that if you took too much of this product, that you could get a toxicity issue with some of these products. You can't have it both ways.
Right.
Either it doesn't get in or it is getting in.
Yeah, and maybe it's not 0 and it's not 100%, right?
Yes,
And I think
yes.
so. Now it's the next question is, okay, so now I got the cheap multivitamin that we're just describing
Yeah.
that is in the big box stores. It's got the label, all the stuff is there, and it's advertised as such. If I take that and put it next to a premium product that's a multivitamin, am I going to have better bioavailability and more absorption of the premium product as a rule, or no?
Not as a rule. The thing about absorption, physiologically speaking, magnesium is kind of a big one in this. There's different forms of magnesium or calcium, magnesium oxide or magnesium glycinate, or, different forms do have different levels of bioavailability. But the body is not a static machine. It's a biology. It's analog, and it adapts. If you're consuming food that has a limited availability of certain nutrients, it changes itself to increase absorption of that nutrient to accommodate the limited availability. If you then switch to a diet or a product that has very bioavailable nutrients in it, the body will adapt and begin to absorb and excrete more of that, absorb less and excrete more of that nutrient.
So the body's really smart.
That's how we made it this far, right? So we don't have as much control as we think we do. Our body just doesn't take everything we put in it for its own sake. It has its own way of protecting itself and maintaining homeostasis, so we don't kill ourselves, right? Now, that's not to say that there aren't higher or lower quality products out there. But the real nutrients that people need are not really going to be in those vitamin and mineral supplements anyway. They're all the other things that are in fruits and vegetables besides the vitamins and minerals. Turns out all the health benefits of fruits and vegetables turn out not to be the vitamins and minerals. We have plenty of those in the environment.
Right.
It's polyphenols and other phytochemicals that are in those products that really are contributing to human health. That's another trend, polyphenols, right? And the microbiome metabolizes polyphenols to produce the active compounds that produce real health benefits. So the challenge is to repair people's microbiomes so they can actually get the benefits from fruits and vegetables. Recent research has shown that we are not the same, and based on your microbiome, you may or may not derive the benefit from that fresh fruits and vegetables.
So and this is, I guess, the interesting thing is that we're looking at one side of the equation, saying, okay, what's the supplement? Is it a high quality, a premium, a low quality? But there's also the other side of it that says, well, who's the person taking it?
Absolutely, and
Right.
you can't separate that.
Yeah.
I don't want to go so far as to say, well, everyone's different, so you're starting with a blank slate with each new person. That's not true. But as far as things that are particularly associated with either male or female and the gut, how it metabolizes those compounds, there's a lot of variation. And, the statistics aren't really telling. They'll say, oh, well, people who take dietary supplements are healthier than people who don't. So, hence, dietary supplements make you healthy. Well, people who take dietary supplements are living a healthier lifestyle
Right.
because they care about their health. And so there are traps that you can fall into by, in support of dietary supplements, and the same, flip side of the coin against dietary supplements. And that's what I try to keep people from doing is, don't jump to the extremes. Reality is always somewhere in the middle. And if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If it sounds ridiculous, it probably is. But just to finish that thought, the thing that creates this problem in the first place is the general lack of understanding of how bodies work. We don't teach it in schools anymore. Very basic biology, right? And people come out of school literally with no understanding of how their bodies work. You can tell them anything, and they'll believe it, right? If you do this, then this is going to cause this to happen, and that's it. Okay. Who am I to argue with that? The body is a black box. And whenever you have a situation like that, you will get a Wild West industry that can say whatever it wants because people don't have the wherewithal to know. And you asked that question earlier, what can they do?
Right.
Well, the first one is stick with a well-respected company, a brand that they trust. The next one is, unlike even 20 years ago, information is available. You can find sources that are interpreting that research in an objective way to say, this is what this is saying. You make your own decision, but this is what this is saying. And that's where people kind of need to try to find is, where is somebody who can interpret the research for us in a way that we understand and can trust. An example would be examine.com. I didn't want to name anybody, but that's really, it's an example of a group that got together, nonprofit, to say, okay, somebody has to be a go-between between all the research and all the marketing that's going on between dietary supplements. They took it upon themselves to do it. When they did it, I went, oh, I wish I could have done that. But that's just an example. Sure. It's accessible to the average person, and people shouldn't expect it always to be easy. You may have to put in some time, learn something, read something, do something hard, right? You know what I mean?
Full effort.
Put in some effort,
Yeah.
and you will come to know,
Yeah.
and you will have more confidence, and you may be of benefit to your friends who have the same questions.
Yeah.
But that's really the only thing you can do. You either have a company who you absolutely trust blindly, or you take it upon yourselves to do the research yourself, figure out how to recognize the wolves in sheep clothing from the sheep, and that's the best you can do.
So this has been a great overview of this whole crazy industry called the supplement industry. I learned a lot, so thank you. I guess, are there any last thoughts you have to leave people with before we conclude our conversation?
I think it would be, I often hear critics of dietary supplements portray consumers of dietary supplements as dupes, right? You're gullible, the old joke that the wagon comes into town, opens up the sheet and says, oh, come on, come over here, I got this tonic here, cures gullibility. I'll take 2, right? Well, we're not all dupes, right? I've spent most of my adult life reading research from academics who have no interest in the financial side of dietary supplements. They're pursuing their passion to understand the body and understand how nutrients in our environment affect our metabolism. Having done that, I'm still a fan of dietary supplements. I've seen all there is to see behind the scenes, how they're manufactured, where they come from, how they're marketed, how they're regulated, and the research concerning their efficacy. They're not all great. They're not all effective. But there's enough there to have a meaningful impact on people's health if they're willing to take a little time, learn for themselves some basics of it, try to turn down their gullibility knob a little bit. So I guess, no, you don't have to be gullible. You can be very educated and an insider. I take a lot of supplements. I take too many supplements. I have bottles all over my house my wife's always complaining about, because I love the notion that there could be something that could really help. And I think people who are optimistic about that too and want to do something good for their health should feel fine about pursuing dietary supplements and including them in their lifestyle.
That's great. Well, Brian, thank you so very much. Really great information, and thanks for the little personal share at the end. And I think that your context here that you laid out is going to help a lot of people.
Thank you. My pleasure.
A lot of great takeaways with this particular interview with Dr. Brian Haycock. Thanks so much for tuning in. A lot of valuable information here. Let's keep this party going. So thanks for watching this, and look forward to seeing you in the next one. Well, we are off to an extraordinary start here with episode 1. I know that there was a lot of information there, and you probably were trying to write notes as quickly as you could, but know also that you can support our vision and mission with Supplements Revealed by owning it. All of this great information can be in your personal health library that you can revisit over and over again. So remember that this information is not only practical for you to have today and useful, but years from now you can revisit it so that as your life is changing and your needs are unfolding, you'll have the resource to always go to be able to guide you in the right direction so you can have the best and healthiest life possible. Coming up in the next episode, we have a variety of topics that are important to you. Everything from where do the source materials come from and what's important to know about them, to how do medical doctors who practice functional medicine actually utilize supplementation, and then also people who have their own personal experiences who transform their life and create a purpose in this world of nutrition that's changing other people's lives. There's a lot there, and I can't wait to be there with you for all of it. So you're gonna love hearing these people, and you will also be fascinated by the information that they bring you. I look forward to being with you in the next episode.
Everyone's talking about the benefits of fish oil, but what we don't really talk about is how are those benefits really achieved? These fat-soluble vitamins, if they're toxic, they're seeping into our system, they're staying there, they're not water-soluble, so we're not really peeing them out. And they can have a major detrimental impact on people's health and wellness journeys.
It's really easy to run the test to see things like, do I have enough magnesium? Is my methylation working properly? Am I detoxifying well? And when you are able to address each part of detoxification, which really is running on nutrients, and so many people are deficient, it all works much smoother and is more effective.
Every chronic illness is impacted by nitric oxide. Every chronic illness is impacted by a lack of vitamin D3. And yet, nobody's talking about how to supplement or raise your nitric oxide. Natural ingredients will safely signal your body and say, produce nitric oxide.